one of the things I recognized when I got cancer at a young age was that we unfortunately can't prevent every cancer. And so it's frustrating sometimes when people really, like myself, believe in prevention. But there's a lot that we know, and we can sort of delve into that today. There's a lot that we understand and we know that can influence our risk. One of the things we were just talking about, right, was that statistic of 30% of breast cancer could be prevented if we really paid attention to making changes in terms of our diet and making the right choices in terms of our diet. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's breast cancer is because of issues with their diet, but there's a lot that we can do in that area that can influence our risk 100%.
Dr. Elizabeth Boham, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
Thank you, Kate. It's great to be with you and all of your listeners. It's really wonderful to see you again.
I'm glad you're here. I really loved your presentation for Sutter Health a few weeks ago. That's how we met. And we hung up off the Zoom after that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to get this doctor on the podcast. I thought you did a really beautiful job of explaining some really heavy science while also weaving in the mind and the body. And you were talking about one of the things that's your expertise, which is breast wellness. And that's not often a term we hear a lot. I hear breast health, we hear breast cancer prevention, but I wanted to just give you space for a moment to talk about what is breast wellness? Why did you choose that term? And what do you hope people will get out of that?
When I was putting together some content around this subject, because as many people know, I had breast cancer when I was 30. So it's almost 25 years ago now. And I was in residency. I thought I was the healthy one, right? Because my undergraduate and graduate degree was in nutrition. I was all about food. I believed in food. I believed in prevention and wellness. And then I got this really aggressive breast cancer. And I was just like, well, that's crazy. And it took me down this whole path of trying to figure out what kind of went wrong with my body and how I could better help create a better balance in my body. And then, of course, with people I'm working with and how I could help them create better balance in their body. And so I was coming up with, we didn't want to just talk about cancer prevention, or we didn't want to just talk about what do you do when we're treating breast cancer, but we wanted to encompass the whole of wellness. And so that's kind of how we came up with the term breast wellness. And now I did that DVD in 2015. So I'm in the process of kind of refurbishing some of that and making some of that material new and updating references and all of that stuff. But that's when we came with that term breast wellness to encompass really that functional medicine approach, that comprehensive approach to both cancer prevention, what we can do when we're going through cancer treatment, as well as what can we do just to stay well and healthy, and how we think about it from this personalized approach as opposed to just, okay, do these 3 things, but really thinking about it from a functional medicine approach where we're saying, okay, for each person, where do they need to focus so that they have the best health in their body and wellness, and of course, breast wellness.
That's awesome. I love it. I love this term. I think a lot of us don't really think about breast tissue day to day. We go about our day, as long as nothing's wrong, it doesn't tend to be a part of our body we think about a lot. And so I'm curious from you, when we think about caring for breast tissue, caring for our whole body, what's the top 1 or 2 things that you wish more people knew that they should be doing every single day to care for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, what we know is when we take care of our breast health, we're taking care of our overall health. So there's a lot of overlap between the things that we do every day that take care of our breast health as well as our overall health. And one of the things I recognized when I got cancer at a young age was that we unfortunately can't prevent every cancer. And so it's frustrating sometimes when people really, like myself, believe in prevention. But there's a lot that we know, and we can sort of delve into that today. There's a lot that we understand and we know that can influence our risk. One of the things we were just talking about, right, was that statistic of 30% of breast cancer could be prevented if we really paid attention to making changes in terms of our diet and making the right choices in terms of our diet. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's breast cancer is because of issues with their diet, but there's a lot that we can do in that area that can influence our risk 100%.
So I want to build on that because before we met, I was looking at your website and I think you do a really beautiful job in every space you're in online of articulating who you are and what you stand for and actually making people feel really safe. because they know what you're going to talk to them about, but they also know you've been through it. And you have these 10 principles, I believe, on your website, and they're all so powerful. And number 10, I think, fits in really well here. In number 10, you say, what we eat accounts for at least 30% of the reasons someone develops cancer. I think that's a really powerful statistic. Can we dive into that more?
Yeah, I mean, we know that food is medicine. And what we choose to eat or what we choose not to eat, right, has a huge impact on our risk for so many different diseases, including our risk of cancer. And I know that food doesn't account for every reason why somebody gets cancer, right? But there's multiple reasons that food impacts our risk of cancer. Everything from what we eat and how that impacts our blood sugar after we eat and our insulin levels, right? So we know that cancer likes to grow when insulin is high and blood sugar is high. So food impacts that aspect of cancer development. Food impacts inflammation in the body. So if you're eating a diet that's more pro-inflammatory, that can increase inflammation in the body. And we know that inflammation likes to feed cancer. So cancer likes to grow when there's more inflammation in the body. We know that food can contain carcinogens, right? So just like if there's pesticides or herbicides used in food production, that can influence our risk of cancer, right? 100%. So when we're making choices of saying, I'm going to be choosing organic instead of conventionally grown food, that's going to impact our risk. So there's so many aspects when we're working with people in terms of their diet that we can work on that can lower their risk. And so often, and I know I was the same way, right? We want to figure out that one thing that caused our cancer. And so often that's not possible. There's often many things that come together. Right? We know this within functional medicine, right? There are many things that come together that influence whether cancer grows or doesn't grow. But food is a really important area that we can all work on, a great leverage point that can influence our risk, right?
That's beautifully articulated. So it sounds like low glycemic, low inflammatory, organic diet is what you'd recommend for somebody to prevent and probably eat during cancer treatment or healing from cancer. How do you talk to people about like what exactly they should be eating?
Absolutely. So that's 100% true. It's important that we meet patients where they're at, right? And so where I always start from the nutrition perspective is trying to figure out what are they eating now, right? Gathering that 3 to 7 day diet diary and lifestyle assessment. So you get a sense of, okay, what are they typically eating? Where are the leverage points? For some people, they're very easy to spot. And for other people, there's smaller tweaks that need to be made, right? But you're right. So you're working on balancing their blood sugar after a meal and preventing too much of an insulin spike. So that, like you said, that low glycemic diet, making sure that at every meal there's sufficient protein, healthy fats, and a lot of fiber. So you don't get any too big spikes in blood sugar or insulin. That's really important. And then, yes, low inflammatory, but also the one thing that we didn't touch on yet is just really working on getting in more polyphenols and phytonutrients into the diet, right? We know that these phytonutrients, those components in our plant foods, have tremendous ability to impact our health. For everything from lowering inflammation, and they can be anti-angiogenic like EGCG in our green tea, and they can help produce some of these metabolites like equal or even sulforaphane, which have really powerful anti-cancer properties in the body. They can influence increasing tumor suppressor gene epigenetically. So there's a lot of power within our food. So I'm really working with patients to, of course, balance blood sugar and making sure they're getting enough phytonutrients. And then things that you want to make sure they're not getting too much of, right, is anything that has extra pesticides, herbicides in it, right? So going organic. And then we, of course, unfortunately have to really watch alcohol because there's a lot of association with alcohol and breast cancer risk. There's a lot of research showing that connection. So these are some of the areas I focus on.
Yeah. Okay. I actually didn't know that. Like, I can hear someone at home thinking, shoot, I thought my organic red wine that I was drinking 2 glasses of a night was supposed to protect my heart. My cardiologist told me to drink it. You know, now I'm hearing it might not be good for cancer. What's some of the research you're seeing that makes you think people should kind of lay off the alcohol?
There's been a lot of research over the years showing the association with alcohol intake and breast cancer. And this research is actually very strong. And there's a linear relationship, unfortunately, between alcohol intake and breast cancer risk. So we know that for women, moderation in alcohol is considered 5 drinks or less a week, right? So where a drink would be 5 ounces of wine or an ounce and a half of hard alcohol, right? So that's considered 1 drink. And so the recommendation in general for women, we say, is 5 or less drinks a week. But with breast cancer, there's even been association with 1 drink a day and increasing risk of breast cancer. So we see that as our intake goes up, so does our risk of breast cancer. When we have 2 drinks a day, that increases our risk even more than if we're having 1 drink a day, and so on. For women who have a history of binge drinking at times, we see a higher risk of breast cancer as well, unfortunately. And there's a lot of theories as to why this is, right? So there's a lot of things that people are wondering, well, what is the connection with alcohol intake and risk of breast cancer? And a lot of research has shown or theorized that, well, maybe it's because of the depletion in B vitamins that occurs when we drink alcohol. So we know that to process our alcohol, we use up a lot of B vitamins, right? We know that. And so there's this question of, are we depleting our B vitamin levels by drinking too much alcohol? And then therefore there's shifts in our ability to methylate. And is that why there is this association? And so some people have questioned, like Dr. Walter Willett, one of the researchers in nutrition, they've wondered, well, maybe we just give women a good B complex, right, with methylfolate in it. Would that counteract the negative impact of the alcohol? And that's been a question. The other connection with alcohol and breast cancer is how it impacts estrogen levels. So we know through the changes in sex hormone binding globulin that occur when we drink more alcohol, there is more free estradiol when we're drinking more alcohol. And so they've wondered, well, maybe that's why we're seeing this connection. And then, of course, the stress on the detoxification system, right? So with the way I think of toxins is we've got this, right? Many people talk about this bucket, right? In terms of the body, of course, has this tremendous ability to handle toxins. We have all sorts of processes in our body that helps us mobilize toxins and detoxify. But if that bucket of toxins gets too full, right, our body can't handle it. So maybe is alcohol just adding to that toxic load? So that's a question. And then finally, people have wondered, well, maybe it's just an association and that people who drink more alcohol have some other unhealthy lifestyle choice, or maybe it's a combination of all. But those have been some of the theories behind why we see this strong connection. And this has been in the literature for years. And as we're seeing more and more of a connection between alcohol and other cancers as well, of course, but definitely with breast cancer, it's a strong connection, unfortunately.
So how do you have a conversation with your clients about this? And I would imagine it's a different conversation depending on if the client is wanting to do everything they can to prevent cancer versus if they've already been diagnosed or they're trying to recover.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, first of all, I try to have the moderation conversation, right? So get a sense of where they're at in a non-judgmental way. Ask that question of what's a typical day like? What's a typical week like? And then figure out for that person how you can help them get to a healthier level of alcohol intake, right? So I often try to start with getting people to those 5 or less drinks a week and try not to have them all at the same time, right? Because we know that's not as good as spreading them out, right? So that 5 or less for women, that's considered moderation, is where I often start. And then for women who have a very strong family history or a personal history, I'm having that conversation of 1 or 2 drinks a week or 1 or 2 drinks a month, depending on where they're at and what their interests are. I think to say you can't have any alcohol doesn't make any sense. And I don't think there's any reason at this point to say that. It's just that we know that there's this linear relationship and we want to help people get down more toward moderation or maybe a little less than moderation for people at really high risk.
For the person who's listening thinking, this sounds like a good idea to me, but I totally am using my glass of wine at night to unwind, or I always drink in social situations with my friends. Do you have any tips, or have you learned tips from your clients about how to reduce intake in a way that's not painful or hard or isolating?
Absolutely. So one of the things I'll have people do is when they go out and they're in a social situation, either have a glass of seltzer first or second, right? So you can have your alcohol drink, whether it's a glass of wine or whatever you're choosing, but then next order a seltzer with lime, or and next and next and next, or order them both together so you don't drink the drink as quickly and you've got your sparkling water with lime. That's my favorite, sparkling water with lime, to sort of help give more time to get through that alcohol drink. And then the other thing I work with a lot with people is not using alcohol to unwind, right? So really, what else can we do to unwind? Is it going for a walk after dinner? Is it getting outside into nature, right? Is it doing some meditation? Is it taking a nice bath with Epsom salts and lavender to help calm the body? And again, people are doing a lot of different mocktails. I love making like a hibiscus tea. I get hibiscus leaves from the local co-op and brew it and then put it in the fridge, and it's an iced tea. It looks really fun and special. It's got a lot of phytonutrients in it, but there's no sugar in it. There's no alcohol in it, and it's really fun. So it's yummy. So that just different ways of incorporating other drinks as well. And then if you don't have wine every night to wind down, then on the weekend, if you want to go out, you feel more comfortable having a drink or two over a weekend, right?
I love that idea too of like kind of mixing. So you have your non-alcoholic drink that's still fun, right? Still sparkly, or has some lemon or lime in there, or your own elixir that you make at home, or a mocktail. And maybe you just start drinking less so that you're drinking a little bit of the non-alcoholic drink. You drink less every time you drink. They make a ton of really cool, they're sometimes called shrubs, or the herbal. Like, have you tried some of these that you can buy packaged?
I have. Yeah. And then, of course, they're going to be rich in phytonutrients, which we know there's so many good benefits of and are fun. Yes.
Yeah. And guys listening at home, you can buy these, and usually they're full of like herbs and berries and really yummy plant foods that have all the phytonutrients. But you can pour them into something like juice and seltzer and make yourself a really beautiful, fun drink. And oftentimes these herbs have their own calming benefits. So if you get one that's made with chamomile or lavender, those are calming herbs. So they actually are going to still help you take the edge off a little bit. Taste great, look great in a cute little glass. I'm curious from you, Dr. Elizabeth, because you have a lot of mindfulness practices woven into your protocols. And you're an RD and MD, right? I know you come from like this very science-heavy background. And yet, so much of what you talk about has to do with meditation, mindfulness, yoga. Why is that important to include alongside these other tips?
Right. So when I was diagnosed when I was 30, and I thought I was doing everything right? So I'm exercising. I was an exercise physiologist. I was exercising every day. I'm eating all my healthy foods. And then I get this breast cancer without having any family history. So I was sort of taken aback and a little bit. So I was like, I sat back and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Right. And I started to do a lot of reading and journaling. I started working with somebody who did Reiki with me once a week. My mom sort of gifted me with this weekly Reiki session for the year, which changed my life. And back when I was diagnosed, Oprah was on TV, like on the regular channel every night or every afternoon. And so I took some time off of residency and I was watching it one day, and she did a whole session on gratitude. And it was so amazing to me because I realized, listening to that this was something I had to work on. It helped me realize that I wasn't doing a very good job at, well, first of all, being grateful, but also in just terms of my day-to-day reaction to the world around me, that I really needed to focus on how I was managing stress, and my outlook and my mindset needed a lot of work. And I realized that was putting a lot of internal stress on me, right? And so she had somebody on and they talked about writing down 3 things you were grateful for every day. And so I had my journal of all sorts of things written in there. And then I started doing my gratitude journal within my journal. And I started to write down the 3 things I was grateful for. And at the beginning, it was so hard because I was 30 years old. I hadn't had my kids yet. I had cancer. It was aggressive. They're talking about really scary things. I'm going through chemo. I'm losing my hair. I lost my period. I was not at all grateful. I was kind of pissed off, to be honest, right? But it really helped me to start to write it down. And at the beginning, I'd be like the sun, food, and like I was making up stuff, like, but then what was amazing is I slowly could actually see the way my brain shifted. Like I could notice that over time, I naturally was just noticing things that I was grateful for from a minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day basis. That what I realized, I wasn't doing that naturally at all. And so the gratitude journal just helped me naturally realize all these things I was grateful for. And that helped so much with calming down my body. And it helped so much with taking some of the fear away. And it helps so much with taking some of that anger and depression away. And then it also really just brought more joy to my life that I didn't have prior to having cancer. Like I realized, okay, this is really, really helpful to just sort of change the way that I interacted with the world around me and enjoyed life on a day-to-day basis. So it was so powerful. So when I decided to do this DVD and ebook and all that stuff, I said, I need to incorporate this into what I'm putting out there because it's so important. Because so often, and I notice this with all my patients, not just patients coming in worried about breast health or who've had breast cancer. When you think about those personalized lifestyle factors, right at the bottom of the matrix, sometimes the exercise and nutrition is really easy to do. Well, it's not easy. We know it's not easy, but it's sometimes easier than that stress reduction, that rest section, right? So often we just sort of, we push through and even push, making our diet perfect, right? And so it's really an important area that we need to work on. And I needed to work on, and I always work on with my patients about how much are you giving your body time to rest and recuperate and enjoy and sleep and manage stress. And so that's, I guess, why I feel like it's so important to incorporate this into. And of course, it's personalized, right? So for some people, the diet is much harder for them to shift and change, or they're not exercising at all. But for many people, that stress and rest area is very important to focus on.
It makes sense chemically because I've heard you talk about how you want to lower inflammation to lower your risk of cancer. Can we talk about sort of the chemical reasons behind why you'd want to reduce stress if you're trying to prevent or heal from breast cancer?
There's so much interesting research looking at the functioning of our immune system and stress levels. So it doesn't mean that stress is all bad. In fact, we know that there's some benefits of stress, right? Like doing a stressful workout or fasting for a period of time, right? There's some good things about stress. So it's not like all stress is bad, but we do know that chronic, regular, daily stress can impact the functioning of the immune system. So, for example, some of that research that has looked at how well a vaccine will work when somebody is a caregiver. So we know that people who are caregiver and under the chronic stress of being a caregiver, they don't mount as much of an antibody response to a vaccine as somebody who doesn't have as stressful of a day-to-day life, for example. So we do know that chronic daily stress without giving our bodies time to rest can really impact the functioning of the immune system. We know that when we do stress reduction techniques such as like heart math, right? They've shown beautifully how well that can impact the functioning of the immune system and how well we produce things like natural killer cells, which go around and gobble up viruses or cancer cells, or that produce different immunoglobulins that help with the functioning of the immune system. So we know that stress is so important, and stress management tools are so important for how well the immune system functions. I mean, everybody really does know that, right? When they're under stress and they're just going, and then they get sick and they get a cold. But think about it as how important rest is from the standpoint of the body then having the ability to go around and find those precancerous cells or those even cancerous cells that are early before becoming invasive cancer. Our immune system is always on surveillance. It's always looking around and saying, okay, this cell's abnormal. I'm going to gobble it up. I'm going to get rid of it, right? And really, that's happening all the time in all of our bodies. And the problem is when the cancer cells continue to grow and become invasive cancer. And so we do need to give the body time to rest and heal so that the immune system can do what it needs to do.
I think that might be novel for someone at home to hear that their immune system is actually what's responsible for surveilling for cancer, catching it early, sort of eating those cancer cells and getting rid of them. And that if you have been chronically immune suppressed, that's not good in terms of making sure that your body's able to get rid of cancer cells that do pop up throughout the course of life. I think people are surprised to hear, like, you might have a cancer cell right now that your immune system is supposed to naturally take care of. And it's when that process is impeded that your risk goes up. So I want to ask you two things. Like, one, what's the ideal amount of rest? Because I can just hear some of my coworkers saying, well, I'll get an extra half hour of sleep one day a week, or I'll take one day of vacation every 6 months. And like, how do we measure if you're getting enough rest? What is the actual amount of rest we're supposed to be getting every day, every night? And then I want to dive into like, if there are any interventions that we can do to actually boost our immune function beyond sleep and rest and relaxation.
Absolutely. In general, we say 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, right? That's a great goal, that we want to be getting those 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. But in addition to that, or with that, I think about rest as well, because we do, and this is something that I had to learn, and I try to work with my patients in terms of learning, is listening to my body and seeing, okay, does it need more downtime? Does it need more fun, right? Does it need more girls' weekends? Does it need more spa days? Does it need more walks in nature? Does it need more meditation? Does it need a yoga class? And so, I mean, for me, it was like in sort of a personality of just pushing through and not hearing what my body was saying. And so this was like this, okay, you've got to really work on listening to your body. And so it's sleep, yep, those 7 to 9 hours, and giving ourselves time to wind down at night with that nice bath or some meditation, right? But it's also other things that can be rejuvenating and give our body rest that are very, very important and healing. And then you mentioned the question of what can we do to boost the immune system? And I like to say strengthen, because people get worried. And I've done a lot of lectures on the immune system, and people get worried if we say boost, does that mean that's going to increase autoimmunity or whatever? So it's really about, right, strengthening and balancing the immune system. And one of the things that we've spoken about so much is the power of things like Asian mushrooms, right? So those medicinal mushrooms like shiitake and reishi, and the Asian mushrooms have these beta glucans in them that are really great at increasing the functioning of our natural killer cells, which are those cells that go around and find those precancer cells or those early cancer cells or those abnormal cells and gobble them up, right? So I love to help people incorporate more mushrooms in their diet, and Asian mushrooms. And then there are times for those people who are at, again, higher risk, where that may be a supplement I add in, is, okay, so what's going on there and what can we do to maybe improve the functioning of your natural killer cells or your immune system in general. I'm always looking at things like zinc and copper levels. So I'll look at serum zinc and copper, and I like them to be about 1-to-1. And it is often we'll see zinc low for a multitude of reasons. And if that's the case, then I'm working on foods that help increase zinc level. And this may be another area that I'll add in a supplement just to help support the functioning of the immune system. And I think that can be really beneficial. And then what I find, especially with young people with cancer, but this is probably with cancer and often in general, there's issues with toxin exposure and the detoxification capacity in the body. And we know that toxins can damage the functioning of the immune system. There's research that shows that toxins can cause autoimmunity, we know, but they also can suppress the functioning of the immune system. So things like lead, mercury, we know can suppress the functioning of the immune system. And so I'm always working with people to sort of assess their level of toxins in their body, how they're detoxifying, and then working to improve their detoxification capacity, which is so many things we can talk about there, but I love glutathione, and then of course the precursors to glutathione for that reason, like NAC or sulforaphane, some of my favorites, or just giving glutathione also just to help improve the functioning of the immune system.
Is there like a supplement stack or a smoothie that you recommend everybody at least talk to their doctor about? Maybe someone who's been alerted to the fact that they have an increased family history of breast cancer recently. Like, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah. So one of the things we know about with the glucosinolates, right? Those are the phytonutrients that are in our cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli sprouts. Actually, broccoli sprouts are really, really high in these glucosinolates, but broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, these plant foods have these glucosinolates that then get turned into sulforaphane, and sulforaphane then helps the body increase its glutathione production. So many times I'll work with people, whether they grow their own broccoli sprouts or put it into a smoothie, like when you mentioned the smoothie, or try to get like 1 to 2 cups at least of those cruciferous vegetables every week, just to help give your body more of these glucosinolates, which then go on to form sulforaphane, which increases glutathione. And also, as we talked about a little earlier, these sulforaphane can help epigenetically increase the tumor suppressor gene activation, which is really important for suppressing tumors. So from a supplement perspective, probably vitamin D and sulforaphane are two of my favorites. So I'm making sure somebody has adequate vitamin D, and then I'm often adding in a sulforaphane or a glucosinolate with morasinase that then goes on to produce sulforaphane in the body. That's one of my go-tos, I guess, for people in this area. If they're not if they don't want to take a ton of things, I'm making sure those things are on board.
Why is vitamin D so important?
So vitamin D, we know, is really important for the immune system. So many studies showing that when our vitamin D levels are low, we have increased risk of certain cancers. We have increased risk of certain infections, right? We had worse COVID when we had low vitamin D. So I'm checking vitamin D levels and making sure that they're up to like an adequate amount.
Yeah, in your mind, what's an adequate amount? Because I think some people go and they see 29 and maybe the low end of the range is 30 and they think, oh, I'm fine. Like what's adequate in your mind?
It's such a great question. I mean, right now, I'm trying to get people between probably 45 and 75 nanograms per deciliter. So that's where I'm at right now. There's sometimes people are going a little bit higher, but there's some question if there's any negatives to that. But it's always sort of circling back, looking at levels, seeing how somebody's doing and that sort of thing.
That's good to know, though. I'm curious, is there if you could kind of wave your magic wand and make it so that anyone who was looking to optimize breast wellness could get a panel from their doctor to kind of check on the nutrients that matter or the inflammatory markers that matter, what would be in that list?
Great question. So definitely C-reactive protein, right? So we know that C-reactive protein is a marker of inflammation in the body. It doesn't pick up everybody's inflammation, but we do know that cancer likes to grow when there's inflammation around. And so I'm always working with people to lower inflammation in their body. And I check a CRP, and if it's elevated, I have to figure out why. And I've got to work on what can we do to lower it. So there's a lot of genetics at play. Some people naturally make more CRP than others genetically. So again, it's not the perfect biomarker for everybody, but I want it to be less than 1. And I've got to figure out if it's high, why is it high? Is it high because they've got excess belly fat? Is it high because they've got some underlying infection or dysbiosis we're missing? Is it high because of their diet, right? So all of these things I'm thinking about and working to lower it. And then fasting insulin, I check at least a fasting insulin on everyone. Sometimes I'll do a glucose tolerance test with an insulin at 1 hour and 2 hour, but definitely fasting insulin, because of course we know with insulin resistance, the association with cancer is really strong with multiple different cancers, definitely with breast cancer. So we know that when people have signs of insulin resistance, they have an increased risk of both getting breast cancer being harder to treat, more likely to have metastases of that breast cancer and have a harder time with recovery from breast cancer. So insulin sensitivity is really important, as we spoke about earlier. So I'm getting at least a fasting insulin, if not something more than that, like hemoglobin A1C, or putting them through a glucose tolerance test where I'm looking at insulin response an hour and 2 hours after a meal. And then, as we mentioned, that serum zinc and copper level, that I'm looking at a vitamin D level. I like to also look at things like the gut microbiome, because we know that that influences our health and our risk of breast cancer. We know that if there's imbalances in the gut microbiome, that can increase the level of this substance called beta-glucuronidase. So many stool tests will measure that. And beta-glucuronidase, we think, increases risk of cancer, or is associated because it allows estrogen and probably other toxins to get reabsorbed from the gut. And so that's something I'm looking at and working to modify if need be. And then I'm also often looking at estrogen metabolism markers. So are people making too much 4-hydroxy estrogen in the way they're metabolizing it? And if so, then we have to add maybe sulforaphane to help with that process. And so I'll look at estrogen metabolism and hormone levels. So I'm also looking at a lot of times genetic SNPs. So sometimes genetics have a huge impact on risk. Of course, we know about those high penetrance genes like the BRCA genes that really increase a person's risk of breast cancer. But the low penetrance genes also impact a person's risk of cancer and breast cancer. So I'll look at a panel of genes that will evaluate or look at how well somebody produces glutathione or what their needs are for vitamin D or what their risk is for oxidative stress and how they genetically metabolize estrogens. So I'm looking at a panel that looks at genetic SNPs as well.
Oh, that's great. I can hear our doctors. I think some of our doctors are wondering, hang on, what genetic SNP test is she using? Do you run specific SNPs like just through LabCorp or using a bundle or a panel or?
Well, right now I use 3x4 a lot. So that's what I'm doing a lot of. We've done other genetic SNP testing in the past and Nordic labs too, but 3x4 is what I'm using now.
We're working with 3x4. We actually just launched their boot camp.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, to teach practitioners like over 6 weeks because it's a long test. It takes a while to learn to interpret it, but it's so clinically valuable. So you're checking on some SNPs and you mentioned a couple, and then you're also looking at the microbiome for beta-glucuronidase. What do you do if you find that someone has altered levels of beta-glucuronidase? Are there interventions that you commonly use?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can use calcium D-glucarate, which will bind to the estrogen or toxins and help it get released in the stool. So maybe we should back up. A beta-glucuronidase will cleave the estrogen that's bound to glucuronic acid. And that can then increase reabsorption of estrogen and other toxins back into the body. So you can use calcium D-glucarate to help bind and eliminate the estrogen and the toxins if you see that high beta-glucuronidase. But then you've got to think about, well, what can I do to shift the microbiome so it's not so high, right? Because we know beta-glucuronidase is higher when there's a dysbiosis in the microbiome. And so then I'm thinking about, okay, what can I do to shift that? And that depends on the situation, whether I'm using like an herbal regimen, because if I suspect that there's a dysbiosis that I need to treat, or I know there's a dysbiosis I need to treat. And then I'm thinking about things like prebiotics, all the polyphenols like pomegranate powder or other prebiotics that can help the probiotics grow, and maybe I'll use some probiotics. So it then depends on the situation. I guess there's also fibers that can help with lowering beta-glucuronidase, like glucomannan fiber, like a PGX fiber that I'm sometimes using for balancing blood sugar. So those are some of the things I do in that situation.
I love that. The pomegranate powder. You're using that as a prebiotic?
Yeah. So we'll have people mix it in like a smoothie, or we have them sometimes mix some things together that help with rebalancing the gut microbiome. And that's something we'll often use because we know the ellagic acid in pomegranate can help feed the akkermansia, and that can then help with healing the gut.
Wow. Okay. I'm already picturing like a morning smoothie with broccoli sprouts, pomegranate, fiber. I don't know if I'm brave enough to put mushrooms in there.
Maybe have those on the side.
Do you have a smoothie that you recommend that people eat? Like, do you have a kind of kitchen sink approach where you're like, throw these 6 things in a smoothie every morning?
I'm not a smoothie person, so I'm not reaching for a smoothie all the time, but some other things you could add. So some other matcha powder would be great because matcha, right, the green tea that is rich in EGCG, epigallocatechin 3 gallate, right, which has been shown it is anti-angiogenic, which helps prevent the blood vessels growing to a cancer cell. It also helps increase glutathione levels in the body. There's been a lot of research with EGCG in terms of breast cancer prevention, but also in terms of blood sugar balance. And so I love a matcha powder in a smoothie is another great thing people can add with their broccoli sprouts and avocado and whatever kind of yummy milk they want to do, and berries, because we know, like, research to show that a cup of berries a day can lower risk of breast cancer significantly. So yeah, absolutely.
That sounds good to me. I like the idea of the powder too. Like, I'm sure they make green tea powder.
Yes, so like matcha. Matcha is typically a green tea in a powder form, sencha or matcha. And I definitely, with green tea, well, with all my teas, try to go organic, and definitely with green tea.
I love it. Okay, so put my green tea powder, my pomegranate powder, maybe my fiber.
Ground flaxseed is a wonderful fiber because ground flaxseed, as we know, it's high in omega-3 fats, but it's also high in lignans, which have like these phytoestrogen-like qualities. So they can block your estrogen and lower estrogen levels, or even lower the endocrine disrupting chemical levels that impact in the body. So ground flaxseed's wonderful. It's a wonderful fiber.
I think we're hitting, it's interesting. We jump straight into the interventions, which I love because our audience loves the practical, tactical. But I want to pull back for a second. And for people who are about to read your book, they're going to see that you have this image of a healthy terrain. And it's in the center, it says healthy terrain. And then there's like 8 pillars that support that. And we've talked about a bunch of them already: green tea, fiber, phytonutrients, sleep and rest, daily exercise and movement, root support, and then omega-3 fatty acids has its own circle. So you just mentioned that flax has both fiber and omega-3s. Why are omega-3s one of the top 8 things that you talk to people about when it comes to this?
Yeah, so it's really that connection with inflammation, right? So we know, as I mentioned earlier, that cancer loves to grow when there's inflammation in the body. And so I'm always really working to get people on a more anti-inflammatory diet, a diet that's going to cause less inflammation in their body, whether it's because we're working to balance their blood sugar and it's higher in phytonutrients and richer in omega-3 fats, because they're great at helping us lower inflammation in the body. So that's why I really focus on them.
That's awesome. And for the person at home who is taking notes, it might be to a full page by now. And maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. Like, let's talk them through the next steps. So how do they take all this amazing information, but turn it into a plan that they can do day to day? Is there a type of practitioner you recommend that they work with? Like, who can they call to help them make this a reality?
I think that's really where functional medicine is so well poised to handle, because what we know is that we need to personalize it. So for me, as I mentioned earlier, working on the way that I was interacting with the world around me, how I managed my stress, I had to work on my microbiome and my detox pathways. But for every person who's at risk or wants to lower their risk for whatever reason, we need to figure out that personalized approach. And that's what really functional medicine is so good at doing, is getting to know that person, understanding where they're coming from, gathering their history, putting it on a timeline, and figuring out, for this person, where do we need to focus? Doing maybe some lab work where you go, okay, for this person, it's really insulin resistance, and that's what we have to focus on. Or for this person, it's really inflammation, and I've got to work on lowering inflammation. Whatever I'm doing, whether it's from a lifestyle perspective or a supplement perspective or whatever, I'm working to lower inflammation. Or this other person, it may be more detoxification. Or this other person, it may be that they're not sleeping and they're just working all the time, or they have too much day-to-day responsibilities, right? So it's really figuring out for that person where they need to focus. And that's why I recommend really working with a functional medicine provider, because they've got the tools to really tease out and personalize that approach for that person.
I think we both probably love the IFM provider search tool.
Absolutely, 100%.
So guys, you can go to Institute for Functional Medicine and go to the Find a Provider section. And what that will show you is what doctors near you are certified in functional medicine. So they're trained to use this approach that Dr. Elizabeth is talking to us about today, and to actually pick out which one of these things matters most for you to focus on most immediately, but also how do we build you a plan that really has your unique set of circumstances in mind. So I love that advice. I think it's so beautiful. We also have a ton of RDs and health coaches who are also now on this site. And so I think a lot of times we think, well, let me find an MD, let me go straight to a doctor. And while you should do that, there are a number of healthcare providers who can really help you on this journey. I mean, a health coach is going to be the one to actually help you figure out how you're going to sleep and how you're going to remember to take your supplements and remember to cook all these meals. The RD can sit down with you and think about, where's your diet now? How do we slowly, enjoyably add more of these medicinal foods to your diet? Like how do we make this truly doable and not just something that you're trying to adopt based on somebody else's template? And you work in an integrative practice where there are all of these providers working together. So tell us about your practice. Like, why do you practice where you practice today? And how does it look when somebody comes to see you guys?
Oh, well, I'm blessed. So I work at the UltraWellness Center in Lenox, Massachusetts. I met Mark Hyman in 2004, maybe even a little earlier. But I started working with him at Canyon Ranch in 2004. And he brought me over. He left at some point and then brought me over to the UltraWellness Center, which is the practice that he started in Lenox, Massachusetts. And so I've been really, it's just a wonderful, fun practice to be a part of. And we have, I guess, 5 doctors, 7 nutritionists, 3 PAs. I can't count all our nurses, health coaches, and an amazing staff for that matter. It's really a fun place to work. And not only do we do functional medicine and we have a lot of fun working together, but we also do like clinical rounds every week. So we get to discuss cases, difficult cases, people we're really struggling with, and with the whole team, once or twice a week. And that's really supportive as well. So I'm blessed to be there and at the UltraWellness Center.
It seems like when somebody comes, do they automatically get a team provided to them? Like, how does it work when someone comes to you?
So that's a great question. So typically people come and they work with one physician. So they say, I'm going to come and see Liz, right? So they come and see me, but I work with a PA as well as a nutritionist and a nurse. And so we've got that whole team. And so most of the time when people come and see a doctor, then they also see a nutritionist, and that's part of that new patient appointment. And so even though my background's in nutrition, I get to rely on all of our amazing nutritionists. So every new patient sees the doctor and the nutritionist. We also have these nutrition only appointments where people can come to our practice and just work with a nutritionist and not see a doctor. So we have that option as well.
That's cool. I did not know that. I want to speak to the person at home who might be newly diagnosed, because I was really touched when you described earlier how you felt. I mean, I feel like getting a diagnosis like this can be so shocking, so scary. You can feel so overwhelmed, so alone. If that person is sitting in their car and they're listening to this, and you have the microphone right now, what are some things you'd want to say to them?
Yeah. So it is scary and it's overwhelming. And there's so much information out there now that sometimes it gets really confusing. People come to me all the time and they just are so confused about what they should eat. And sometimes the more they read, they get even more confused. So, but you do have time to put together a good team. And I think that's really important. And if you meet with an oncologist and you get a recommendation of this is how your treatment plan should go, and you're not 100% sure, get a second opinion. And that can be really helpful. I know I did. It really helped me recognize my path. And then I think what functional medicine is really well poised to do in most situations is work along with a conventional medicine treatment plan. So, I mean, there are some practitioners out there that are treating cancer, but so many of us, like myself, we're working along with an oncology team or working along with conventional medicine and just helping that patient create the terrain in their body where cancer is less likely to grow. So often the oncologist is focusing on that cancer cell, and that can be really important to do, right? Like we're going to get rid of it with these modalities. But the thing that we're really focusing on from a functional medicine approach is how do we create that terrain in the body where cancer is less likely to grow, where we're going to create a terrain where the treatment is going to be more effective and make it so you're less likely to get a reoccurrence, and work to strengthen the body so it can work through these treatments and personalize an approach to you. And so I think that's a really powerful team. That's a very powerful team.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think One of the things I'm realizing that I can do better, and maybe our entire industry is, I think so often, so many of us are trained in medicine and we go like, well, yeah, we know if somebody recommends surgery or chemo or radiation, it's like, sure, yeah, do that. And let's talk about all the new, exciting, natural stuff you can do as well. But I'm realizing that the as well part often gets missed. And there's a lot of patients who will come in thinking, well, because I believe in natural medicine, that means I can only do natural things. And I'm really glad to hear you say that it's a whole team approach. So how do you counsel a client like that who might come in and feel really afraid about the conventional treatments that are being offered to them and need some reassurance about that?
I think that there's some great things that conventional medicine does, and especially in an acute situation, they can be life-saving. And so there's many times that it's a wonderful thing when we come together and when we use the best of both worlds. And I think that's really what we want to reiterate and encourage, is recognizing that there's the best of both worlds. And that sometimes these conventional medicine approaches are life-saving, and we want to utilize them when they are. And it's hard to give a blanket statement because everybody's an individual. But as I said, like, that's a great time. If you're not sure about your treatment plan, getting a second opinion and really, talking it through with other people who've been through those treatments. What has their experience been? What did their providers say? What does some of the data show? And what else can I do to create that terrain in my body that's stronger and can support and help me work through this whole process?
That's beautiful. And it seems to me like when people are doing the natural support along with something like chemotherapy or radiation, they tend to have a little bit more manageable side effects. And it's nice to be able to focus on building back stronger. While you're doing this intense thing, it doesn't mean that you also can't be really nourishing your body and strengthening your body in other ways that I think feel really empowering when you're going through something like this.
So important. I mean, I know for myself, I would walk every day. And so there was times in my treatment process where I couldn't run like I was running before, but I could at least get outside and walk every day. And that just felt so good. And the research shows that that's so important from a survival perspective. And we also know that there's so much really cool stuff going on from a nutrition perspective in terms of treatment as well. So all of the research that Walter Longo and those researchers are doing in terms of the fasting mimicking diet around cancer treatment and the power of that to it decreases the side effects you get from some of the chemotherapeutic drugs, as well as increases survival. And I mean, those are things we're utilizing all the time. I think they're important to work with a nutritionist when you're thinking about doing some fasting around treatment, because you want to make sure you're doing it in a healthy way. But it can be very, very helpful in terms of supporting whatever treatment you're going through.
This is awesome. I was going to ask you before I let you go, what are some of the things that are on the horizon that you're seeing in the research that you're really interested in?
Yeah, I love the research around the fasting mimicking diet, and we utilize it with our patients on a day-to-day basis where we're saying, okay, let's say a patient is going through chemotherapy, for example, and we're having them really cut back on calories for those 2 days before, day of, and day after to really help with the chemotherapy being even more effective and to help with decreasing side effects. Because as many people know, most cancer cells can't go into ketosis. So when you cut way back on calories, they're at a disadvantage. And then the chemotherapy can be more effectively killing them off, the cancer cells. The other thing I think that's so fascinating is all this research on the microbiome. And I think we're just learning more and more every day about how do we better balance the microbiome and what can we do? How can that influence our risk for disease and what we can do to help improve the functioning of our microbiome through good, healthy diet with all of the pomegranate powder, for example, and the EGCG, as well as fiber and probiotic rich foods, as well as probiotics, and really working in that area. I think those are some of the really exciting areas that we know are really impacting risk.
I love this. So I think people are going to want to stay in touch with you and keep hearing the insights as you learn them. They definitely are going to want to stay tuned for when you publish the new edition of your book. Can you tell people, where can they find you? How can they follow you?
Yeah, so I'm Elizabeth Boham, MD, on Instagram and Facebook. My personal website is drboham.com. And I still have a few of those DVDs left to sell. I don't know, a lot of people don't have DVD players anymore, but it's also available. My video is available on Vimeo. But I'm redoing, as I mentioned earlier, the ebook. I have a free ebook that you can download, and I'm in the process of redoing it to bring the research up to date, since that was published in like 2015 or 2017. So that's all on drboham.com. And then, of course, the UltraWellness Center website. So ultrawellnesscenter.com for my practice.
I'm so glad you were here today with us. Thank you for sharing this really valuable information.
Thank you, Kate. It was great to be with you.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.